They are the insiders, Darren, Dreger, Pierre, LeBrun, and Chris Johnston. Well, gentlemen, these are the most proposed rule changes in the NHL since the reset following the lockout 20 years ago. And not surprisingly, coaches' challenges are front and center.
Yeah, and it's in the spirit of making sure that they get the right call, right? And we should point out that it has to go to the competition committee and then ultimately to the Board of Governors for final approval. But the league is recommending a couple of added coach challenges, one specific to the puck over glass penalty. So if the puck is deflected off a stick, a penalty is called. Once cleared, a coach will be able to throw out the coach challenge to make sure that the right call was made. So it's to take down the penalty. However, if the video coach isn't accurate, then obviously it turns into a 5-on-3. Similarly, when you've got the high sticking minor penalty that's called, and then we see on video replay that it in fact was a teammate of a player that clipped him with a stick and not the opponent. So again, provided that there's clearance to the competition committee and final board approval, those are two additional coach challenges.
And the takeaway here for me is your video coach's value just went up, and a number of teams we've seen this year have given their coach the player of the game belt after a successful challenge for whether it's an offside play or goaltender interference. But with the stakes involved here, that you'd be down a 5-on-3 penalty if you get one of these wrong, your video coach better be right.
Yeah, and they discussed 3-on-3 OT over the last couple of days in a smaller group and the larger group, and they decided to leave it alone. Remember at the November GM meetings, there were managers that complained about some of the OT sessions getting boring because the offensive team with the puck regrouping, leaving the zone. Hockey ops took a close look at it over the last couple of months and said, you know what, it's not worth bringing in some of the changes that we're thinking about. 70% of games and in 3-on-3 OT is good enough for them.
Had an interesting conversation with George Peros, the senior VP of player safety. And at one point in the conversation, he said, man, I feel like I'm taking more hits now than I ever did as a player, which I guess is not surprising given his position.
Well, that's part of the job. And there's no question on Monday when he was part of a breakout group that, I think he faced some pointed, we'll call it constructive criticism of, some things have gone on. But I think what should be said here is that the head of the Department of Player Safety, he really went through and introduced the key members of his team, went through the process of how they arrived there. And I think coming out of this, what some GMs want anyways, maybe just a little bit more back and forth when one of their players is involved in one of these situations where the supplemental discipline is on the table. So, while maybe the heat was up a little bit entering the meeting, I do think coming out of it, it's not going to be quite as hot as the temperature here in Florida.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think George Peros, the Department of Player Safety, and ultimately hockey operations wants to expand the relationships that they have with the general managers. And it was stressed. Look, if your team is playing in Toronto, come in a day early if you're the general manager. Spend time in the situation room. Likewise, if you're in New York, go into the Department of Player Safety, meet with George Peros, watch these guys and how they do their job. So it's all about relationship building.
It's interesting, LTIR was not officially on the agenda. However, it did become a bit of a hot button issue behind closed doors.
Yeah, and so what we understand now, and makes a little more sense, is that what's happened is the GM's executive committee, which met with Gary Bettman and Bill Daly and Colin Campbell on Sunday night before the GM meetings, had a discussion about LTIR. And what they decided is Bettman and Daly advised the GMs on this committee, go back and speak to all the GMs across the league over the next few months and try to find consensus or try to get all the feedback that you need before you come back to us as a league and whether or not we need to bring this next level with the NHL Players Association. And I think it's a constructive way to do it. And in fact, if you think about the guys around the committee, Doug Armstrong, Ken Holland, Kevin Shelvdayoff, Don Waddell, Lou Lamoriello, and Steve Yzerman, each of those members of the committee are responsible for a group of 4 or 5 GMs each, and those are the guys they're going to go talk to about this issue, and we'll see if they find consensus. They may not. They may just say, you know what, it's not worth the conversation that it's going to require with the players. But then again, they might come back and say it's time to tweak the way this works in terms of no salary cap in the playoffs.
And while we were making our way around the halls, some news from the Flyers camp, CJ.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising. A month after being named captain, Sean Couturier being a healthy scratch for Tuesday's game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Had a chance to catch up with Danny Briere, the general manager, quickly. He said, first of all, it's John Tortorella's call, the head coach. This is the way he does it. He treats everyone fairly. But he also added he intends in the coming days, maybe when the dust settles a bit, to sit down with Couturier and make sure that everyone's on the same page there.
That's it. 2 days in the books. We're not quite done yet. Still day 3 to come, after which we'll hear from Commissioner Gary Bettman and Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly.